fiction, we say we have the best education system in the world in the U.S., and the only thing that we really are the best at is the amount that is invested per child is the most in the United States. But our results aren't showing that. The results of our healthcare system are not showing that we're number one. And I'm really forcing myself into a perspective that doesn't have to do with the colors and the geometric shapes on the flag of my country. It has to do with the results of the services that are provided. Because that's the only thing that matters. So I want you to think about that as we continue on through this morning. Let me call your attention to a couple of the pieces on here that I think you might find of value. I do have to say one more thing in context. I have been a student of the systems change that is done from the Canadian perspective versus the systems change that is done from the U.S. perspective. And I know one big difference. The U.S. perspective has been when you see a lack of equity in some kind of a way, you create a very prescriptive law that demands, federal law, that demands that people do things in a certain way. That's the U.S. strategy. The Canadian strategy is not that at all, is it? And so what you find in the U.S. is you find a lot of kind of, how do I say this appropriately? Kind of minimally successful versions of whatever it is you're trying to achieve, but more widespread. In Canada, what you see in terms of the issue of inclusion, as an example, is if a community really gets into the issue of inclusion and really becomes a community, you see the most astounding examples you could possibly imagine. And then in some other places, you don't see as many kids included at all. Now, which approach is a better approach? It seems to me that if the Canadian approach could become something that would touch every child in Canada, that approach is better. Because what you're gaining is the heart of the person as well as the mind and the action of the person. The U.S. strategy is that the heart will follow if you force the behavior. And I have to tell you that I have not found that to be ever true. No law has ever changed a heart. The purpose of leadership is to change hearts. And that's the difficult thing about this issue of leadership. So we'll talk about that as we go. And so I've got several things on here that I think might be helpful for you. There's one that I'll call your attention to is Brentro, B-R-E-N-D-T-R-O. These are folks in South Dakota. And they have produced a wonderful circle of courage that is a really wonderful way of organizing services for kids around 4 basic principles. And they learned this because Larry Brentro is an Anglo man who went to the University of Michigan, and he met there a colleague from South Dakota who's a Lakota Sioux named Martin Brokenleg. And Martin Brokenleg and Larry Brentro put together their approach called the Circle of Courage, which is a really wonderful way of organizing. And if you don't know that one, that's a good one. Some of you are shaking your head yes to this. Yeah, it's good, isn't it? That's good work. You'll notice a lot of stuff by Covey there because, as was mentioned, I did work for him for 2 years. That was an astounding couple of years for me. Being able to interact with him directly was really amazing because he's the only one on the globe who actually lives those 8 habits of highly effective people. Thus, he calls it the 8 habits of highly effective, not highly average people, but highly effective people. So I really learned a lot from him that I'll be sharing with you. But you have to also understand something. I want to warn you that you become a lovey-dovey, covey sort of person when you work for him. And so I am sort of that lovey-dovey, covey sort of a guy. So be prepared for that. But you'll see the Covey books. The Covey SMR book that's in 2006, put a star next to that one, called The Speed of Trust. This is a very expert treatment of that issue of trust and how powerful that trust can be as a point of leverage for accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. Organizations that don't have a lot of trust in them have people who are not willing to take risks together. And if you're not willing to take risks together, you're not going to achieve all that you want to achieve. That's the point of that. And so I think you'll find that useful. I'll be referring to Dufour a lot in these 3 opportunities that I have to speak with you during this conference. Dufour has become a real icon in the United States, and I think his work has come to Canada as well, on this issue called a professional learning community. And he is the person who kind of coined that term. That is the coolest thing to say about yourself, that you work in a professional learning community. And of all the people who have ever said that to me, maybe 5% of the people who say that actually work in a professional learning community. And I'll talk to you about why that's easy to say things. It's not so easy to do things is the point of that. The Fullen books are there. In 1993, when his first Change Forces book came out, it changed my thinking forever. And it turned out to be a trilogy, as you can see if you go from the bottom to the top. And those books were very, very helpful for me, and I hope for you as well. The 6 Secrets of Change, I'm going to be using that book as a part of what I'm doing this morning with you. And then this latest one, All Systems Go, which is just so grand. So pay attention to that and make sure you've read every single piece of writing that Fullen's ever done. He really is good. I'm going to have you turn to the next page, if you would, on the book list. And I'll call your attention to the Lencioni book. Lencioni wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a really nicely prepared kind of a treatment of the issue of why teams don't work, and then he talks about what a truly cohesive team can do. And I especially like that one because I've got a 30-year-old daughter who's now beginning her career speaking in front of big groups, and this is the first book she recommended to her dad to put on his book list, which I thought was pretty cool. So Stephanie, I wanted to give Stephanie a little plug there. Let me have you go down to the Marzano pieces that are there. Robert Marzano is really doing nice work. The Art and Science of Teaching, that 2007 book, is the latest compilation of what is called the effective schools literature that has been built in Great Britain, in Canada, in the United States, and Australia. But it's only 40 years of research, so we shouldn't follow it, right? Because we have a different idea about the way kids should be taught. You know, we have a constructivist view that kids will learn if we just get them together in a group, and all kids will do that. Well, what if some of the kids don't? What then will we do is the question. The problem with having a perspective about decision-making that comes from a particular philosophy is that no philosophy works with all kids all the time. So there's a woman that we work with at Cambium Learning who's one of our authors, because we publish technology and services and also print interventions that are in all 3 tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Anita Archer is the person's name who did a Tier 2 intervention for us called Rewards. And Anita was asked this question: how do we deal with this constructivist versus explicit instruction thing? How do we deal with that? She said, well, if you've got a group of kids who are learning how to read using a constructivist approach toward reading, and you have the data to prove it, then keep using it with those kids. And if you've got a group of kids for whom that's not working, stop doing it. Find something else that works. And that's pretty good advice, I think. So that's what the Marzano book talks about. 2 books on leadership, particularly the Marzano and Waters book on district leadership that works is the best piece of work to date, I think, on what you do at a school division or school district. And then the Marzano, Waters, and McNulty piece really revolutionized the way people thought about the principalship within a school, and I'd recommend that one strongly to you. Both are real data-based meta-analyses trying to find the connection between behaviors of leaders and school achievement in kids. And so I think you'll find those to be helpful for you. Just because we're talking about leadership here, and I'll mention this, I always look for leadership books that are not written by men because I think that there are too many that are written by men. That doesn't make any sense to me. When I look at the way a lot of my colleagues who are females and the way that they respond to leadership challenges, it seems more consistent with what the literature says that one should do in a leadership challenge than the way a traditional man with testosterone poisoning would respond to it. And we all have that to some degree, you know. So this Pagano and Pagano book, that's a mother-daughter team who put together the Transparency Edge. And what they studied was the issue of credibility of leaders. And they looked at 25,000 360-degree evaluations of middle managers. And how many of you have ever done a 360-degree evaluation? That's the scariest thing you could possibly do. You get this survey about how your leadership's going, and then you give it to your boss, you give it to people who are at your same level, and you give it to people who report to you. And all that's anonymous around you except for obviously your boss and your perspectives. And you get that compiled back to you, and then you get to deal with it. How are you doing? And they looked at 25,000 of those and came up with their perspectives about the behaviors that people should show. It's really beautifully done. Just a couple more of these that I think might be helpful for you. I'm also on the board of directors for the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and I'll mention that group because they are really important for this RTI revolution, NCLD. It's ld.org if you wanted to go to that site. We sponsor what is called the best website on RTI, called rtinetwork.org. rtinetwork.org. It was funded with a $2 million grant from the Cisco Foundation, and it's really beautifully done. All of that said, I want to call your attention to the Shaywitz book. That is Shaywitz S. Overcoming Dyslexia. Sally and her husband Bennett are researchers at the Yale University Medical School, and because they kept after it for the last 30 years, brain scanning technology has gotten us to a place where they have been able to say definitively that learning disabilities is a real live physical disorder. In the ancient days when that term was first kind of coined by Sam Kirk and some other people, learning disabilities, he called it a minimal brain dysfunction. And everyone laughed at him because no one could look in the brain and see that. Well, the Shaywitzes finally did, and guess what they found it to be? A minimal brain dysfunction. And so it's a real difficulty that these kids have, and this is really beautiful work that Sally's done, and it's really easy to read, so I'd call your attention to that as well. And then on the last page of this book list, I've got websites, and those websites are my favorite at this moment in regard to this RTI revolution, the first one being rtinetwork.org, so you can take a look at that. And then the music I have listed here on the bottom of this is a test because I'm a school psychologist. This is my test to see if you're cool. And so you have to see if you're cool by looking at the music. If you don't know all of those people on that list, then you're not cool. So you have to decide if you're cool or not. All right, let's get to the presentation itself and the conversation, because what I'm going to do after I set you up for this is we're going to go through each of the 6 secrets that Fullen talks about in his book, The 6 Secrets for Change, and there's a discussion at the end of each of those secrets to kind of get you to think about what you would do in relationship to RTI leadership. Relentlessly doing whatever it takes to improve achievement. There was a wonderful lecture given by a professor at the Carnegie Mellon University a few years ago. It was given by Randy Pausch, and he was given this opportunity that's an interesting opportunity. It's kind of a fun idea. The opportunity was, you know, Professor Pausch, you're really a good lecturer. We want you to give a lecture in 3 months as if it's your last lecture that you'll ever give here at the university. So if you could have one last time to talk to people, what would you say in 1 hour? So he said, yeah, I'll do that. So in that next 3 months, he went to the doctor because he wasn't feeling well, and he found out that he had a very virulent form of pancreatic cancer and that he only had about 6 months to live. So when he gave the lecture 3 months later, it was like really his last lecture. And he decided to talk about this issue, really achieving your childhood dreams. And I've got a 4-minute clip that I want to show you of what he says, because this is the essence of what leaders need to pay attention to. So let me see if I could make this work. It would be a very bad thing if I couldn't make it work, right? It's right here. This is called Windows 7. Any of you have it? I don't know where these guys live who create these things, but I'd like to meet one of them on a road with my car. Okay, so here we go.
A growing number of universities today are asking this exact question by inviting their best professors to give hypothetical last lectures, to think deeply about what matters most to them.
This lecture series used to be called The Last Lecture. If you had one last lecture to give before you died, what would it be? I thought, damn, I finally nailed the venue. And then
But Randy Pausch, a computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon University, the last lecture he delivered this week was more than just an academic exercise. He has pancreatic cancer and expects to live just a few more weeks or months.
If I don't seem as depressed or morose as I should be, sorry to disappoint you. And I assure you, I am not in denial. I am in phenomenally good health right now. I mean, it's the greatest thing of cognitive dissonance you will ever see, is the fact that I am in really good shape. In fact, I'm in better shape than most of you.
September 18th, during the Carnegie Mellon campus, in last lecture was titled, How to Achieve Your Childhood Dreams.
So anybody